What is the most up thing someone close has confessed to you? Story 1. I once went to a BBQ hosted by the parents, we'll call them Tim and Carol, of one of my son's classmates. They were in grade 3 at the time. It was a no-kid BBQ, a get-together for all the parents to meet and get to know each other. I had already known the hosting couple casually from the school for the last 2 years. We had been friendly and chatty, but not friends as such. As the night wore on, more and more people got drunker and rowdier. I'm not much of a drinker, so I sat on a chair on the patio watching the fun. Tim sat next to me, fairly drunk, and started to say what a nice person I was, and what a pity it was that I was single. I began to brace myself for a drunken proposal, but I was way off about where the conversation was heading. Tim said to me that I had always treated him and Carol kindly, and that he wished he had a friend like me. I was feeling uncomfortable and was looking for an excuse to leave, when out of nowhere he said he had a confession to make. I was now getting up and ready to leave. He stopped me and said he had to tell me his secret. When he was 19, he had taken the life of his stepfather after the man had harmed his mother one too many times. He went into a few specifics about what he did with the body, and for the last 16 years, everyone believed that the stepfather had run away. No one suspected what had really happened. I just sat there. What do you even say to that? I did some digging and asked around, and the widely accepted story is that the stepfather had just disappeared one day, in the middle of the night, leaving behind all of his belongings. His mother and sister say he must have run away. I don't think they have any idea about the truth. Story 2. A former co-worker hooked up with a random guy and got pregnant with twins. Several months in, she reached out to the guy, and after they chatted more, he mentioned being mildly on the autism spectrum. Her response was to start buying every pill and substance she could find on the street to try to cause a miscarriage of the twins, who were already far along in development, because she refused to raise children who might be on the spectrum. What ended up happening, though, is that it didn't work, and she caused permanent damage to those children for life. They were born underdeveloped and have a number of medical issues. No one really understood why she told us that. I can't imagine how their father must have felt. Story 3. I went to high school with a guy who had been adopted from India when he was a teenager. He didn't know English, so they placed him 2 grades back. He was 20 as a senior and ended up being expelled after a girl, who was known to be a compulsive liar, accused him of threatening her with a screwdriver in woodshop class and attempting to assault her. People generally believed her because he already had a reputation for being inappropriate with 14-year-old freshmen. That same summer, I was at a concert and happened to spot him in the crowd. I felt compelled to ask what happened. I figured he would default to, "It's not true," since he didn't even know me. Nope. He said he had held the screwdriver to her neck and tried to get under her skirt, but she fought back. He said he thought it was ridiculous that he was expelled when he didn't even go through with it. He truly believed that failing to complete the act meant it didn't count. I was 15 at the time, and to this day, it remains the most disturbing and twisted confession I've ever heard from someone. Story 4. Years ago in college, I had a nighttime class, and sometimes we would go out for drinks afterward. There was this one guy in class who seemed nice but very closed off. He always wore long-sleeve black shirts and jeans, even when it was warm. One night at the bar after a few drinks, he told me that he was a former extremist. Among numerous other disturbing things, he said he had gotten out of prison 2 years prior for what had been pled down to a reduced charge of aggravated manslaughter. I think he and his friends had attacked and fatally injured a man when he was 18 or 19. He was in his late 30s or early 40s when I knew him. According to him, they saw the man walking, minding his own business, and decided to harm him simply for being nearby. There was nothing accidental about it. It was intentional and deliberate. He said he had since learned the error of his ways. The clothes he wore were to cover up his past tattoos, which he was in the process of removing or covering with new ones. He expressed a great deal of guilt over who he used to be and what he had done. He had become a counselor for teens involved in gangs. He had tried to reach out to the family of the man he had hurt, to apologize and beg for forgiveness, but they wanted nothing to do with him. Last I heard, he was married, had a daughter, and was in therapy. Story 5. It's tame compared to other comments in this thread, but I had a bunch of online friends that I played video games with from a young age. One had a neighbor who was around 23 that I really connected with when I was 12. He was like the big brother I always wanted. We'd chat almost every day for years and play games together with our group, watch shows and movies together, like we were as close as can be for online friends. He'd even buy me games and expansions and game time, and I really saw him as family. Well, he started acting really strange around the time I turned 16 and confessed he had feelings for me. Talked about wanting to have children, a long-term relationship, etc. All with me. He was really the only true friend I had, and being young and kind of lonely, I tried to kindly reject him. He didn't take it well and just blew up on me and said some horrible, awful things. He blocked me, and a few years later, he reached out again. I was lonely and I truly missed the friendship we shared. I gave him a second chance. It wasn't long before he started making comments again about knowing why he had liked me so much for so long, talking about how great I was and how I was perfect for him. While I was 20 at the time, it just felt so uncomfortable, and I didn't even bother to reject him. I just straight ghosted him. I know it's not like the worst thing ever, but it really warped my idea of friendships and relationships for a while. Story 6 reminds me of an ex I had. She told me she was into intense role play pretty much right away. I've never been that adventurous, to be honest, but I've always been more dominant than submissive and had a few previous partners who were into being tied up, lightly choked, and similar things. I expected we'd probably pick a safe word. I'd tie her up, be a little rough. She'd say, "No, stop," with a wink, and everything would go smoothly. And that's exactly how it started. But eventually, she wanted something more. She wanted me to go home and then come back later that night with no warning, literally enter through her back door, which she'd leave unlocked, and act as if I didn't know her. It was essential that neither of us acknowledge we were in a relationship. She would run, panic, freak out, do everything short of actually screaming for help or hurting me, and I was supposed to do whatever it took to catch, restrain, and engage in the scenario. She even told me I could bring a prop and be more aggressive if I wanted. I didn't. After some back and forth, she finally agreed to use a safe word. We always had one before, but she was really hesitant about it for this. I went through with it once. It was mentally and physically exhausting, but when we finally got to the point of intimacy, it was unsettling how much more engaged she was than usual. It became very clear that this extreme scenario was the only thing that truly excited her, and anything less just didn't work. It left me with a lot of mixed feelings afterward. Story 7. My former boss and close friend at the time admitted to having an ongoing inappropriate relationship with his adopted daughter. They adopted her at age 14, and he claimed that nothing happened before she turned 18, as if that makes it much better. But that timeline never added up to me. I'm pretty sure it started when she was around 16 or 17. The adopted girl took the brunt of the blame, got kicked out of the house, while she was still 18, I believe, and he and his wife are still married, living in the same home. We're no longer friends. In response to the girl getting blamed, the wife accused her of seducing her husband. The wife might have been more at fault than him in some ways. To conclude, I eventually left the company. I could not trust or respect him after that. I've had several run-ins with his wife over the years, ranging from coldness toward me to flat out accusing me of ruining the company and their family. I ended up moving around and up in the industry we were in, and now make twice what I did back then. I saw the girl once, several years ago, but didn't get a chance to talk to her. I hope Lori is doing well. Story 8. After my grandfather on my dad's side passed away, one of my cousins revealed that he had been unfaithful for a long time. As long as I had known him, he had been involved with a woman who was essentially his girlfriend. They had been together for as long as I could remember. In the 1970s, my grandmother passed away from what was called an accidental insulin overdose. She was a type 1 diabetic. What had actually happened is that my grandfather had been unfaithful for years with this woman who remained his girlfriend. My grandmother found out and eventually couldn't take it anymore, and she ended her own life. It definitely explained why my dad had such a poor relationship with his family. It was an open secret, but no one would acknowledge that what my grandfather had done was wrong. Apparently, people thought my grandmother was overly emotional or unstable, and the family didn't really like her. Still doesn't excuse what happened. Story 9. My grandfather was a hobo, not a bum or tramp, during the Great Depression. He used to ride the rails, secretly hopping onto trains to travel between cities. He had a lot of wild stories, but the one that really stuck with me was the time he and two other travelers got caught by the railroad police while en route. One of the men he was traveling with was black, and the officers made him jump off the moving train. I asked my grandfather if he survived, a very Reddit kind of question from a 10-year-old me, and he said he wasn't sure, but probably not. Fun fact, there are tons of online posts answering the question, what happens if I jump off a train going 50 miles per hour? The train in question was probably going somewhere between 45 and 75 in the 1930s. Yes, I did a lot of research on this because the story haunted me from a young age. My grandfather and the other man were badly beaten by the railroad police and then escorted off at the next rail yard once the train came to a stop. Story 10. I'm a medical massage therapist, and most of my patients come through the VA or are first responders. The body's a strange thing, and sometimes I end up unintentionally triggering some deep emotional trauma along with the physical tension. The ones that stand out most. One of my VA clients suddenly started describing the moment he had to identify his friend's eyes and arm in a pile of debris after an explosion. Another was a police officer who told me about a raid on the home of an extremely abusive father with young children. The graphic details of both stories actually made me a little sick to my stomach, and I'm someone who listens to true crime podcasts regularly with no issue. But what really disturbed me wasn't the content. It was how these two strong, kind men, who always joked and laughed during sessions, suddenly began crying and spilling these memories like they had no control over it. These stories came out of nowhere. We were joking around while I worked on a deep tissue massage, and then suddenly they were in tears. The mind-body connection we have is absolutely wild. Story 11. A former coach of mine resigned after being accused of inappropriate private interactions with a student. She was the only girl on the wrestling team, socially awkward, and often faced teasing, so she had a rough time. All my buddies and teammates defended him because we were convinced he was a good guy and would never cross any lines with her. We believed he was just being a mentor, like he was to all of us. Years later, at a barbecue at my friend's house, we were all grown men at that point, many of us still involved in wrestling. He casually told us that he had been intimate with her a few times in his car. I was completely stunned. I couldn't believe how nonchalantly he spoke about it. It hurt a lot. I haven't spoken to him since. Still bothers me to this day. Story 12. My mother was absolutely awful to me when I was a young girl. She would hit me, constantly belittle me, say horrible things about me to my siblings, try to embarrass me in front of my friends, and tell my dad I was a terrible person, claiming I was trying to separate them whenever I told him how cruel she was to me. Eventually, my dad divorced her because she was incredibly difficult to deal with. I was always scared around her, and I never understood why she was so hateful toward me. I distanced myself in my mid-20s. Even as an adult, she was still just as mean. I remember thinking, what did I do? Was I a bad kid? Am I a bad person? But I was a straight A student, valedictorian, never got into trouble, earned a full athletic scholarship, and now I run 2 successful businesses. Even my siblings would say, yeah, mom just doesn't like you. Fast forward to my mid-30s, this year, she came to me and said to my face that she had hated me since I was a child and was always jealous of me because I was beautiful and free-spirited. She said she envied every aspect of my existence and admitted I was her biggest regret because of the way she treated me. I told her I appreciated her honesty, but that I had no space for her in my life. She broke down crying. While I have empathy, the truth is she gaslit and emotionally tortured me my entire life because of her own misery and insecurity. Hearing her admit it was validating, since I had often questioned my own reality. But now I know I was never the issue. It was deeply messed up. Story 13. When I was around 14, I was hanging out with my boyfriend after school, and we were having a great time watching funny videos. We started hearing sirens in the distance, and he suddenly said he needed to leave. I asked why, and he casually said something like, I better make sure they haven't found her. I was confused, so I asked what he meant. He told me his mom wasn't going to let him come over because he hadn't done his homework. So he pushed her down the apartment stairs, breaking one of her legs. He said he stepped over her, locked the door behind him, and left her there injured and crying so he could come visit me. He was so calm and cheerful while telling me that no one would have suspected anything. He told me he left her there hoping he wouldn't have to ask for permission anymore. Then said he loved me, hugged and kissed me goodbye, and started walking home. I didn't see him for a few years because he was arrested on the walk back and spent some time in jail. She survived, by the way. As an adult, a childhood friend of mine once told me her current relationship was going downhill. She started venting about how her partner kept threatening to leave after their major fights, how she caught him on dating apps, and that he had recently smashed their TV during an argument. A few days later, I was visiting while she was babysitting, and he came home early from work. The next thing I knew, she had pulled his shotgun from the bedroom and was waving it at him and across the room, past the kids. They were both yelling, and he kept begging her to put it down and asking if she was out of her mind. Later that week, she told me she had found a solution and that having a baby would fix this. I had been pointing out the abuse and toxicity from the beginning, so I was stunned. I told her a baby wouldn't solve anything and would only make things worse and more stressful. They were already struggling to care for the child she had, and most of their fights stemmed from money problems and rent issues. She seemed to agree after hours of talking and hearing the same from other friends. A couple of months went by, and I got a call that it worked. I asked, "What worked?" She admitted to poking holes in all their condoms with a sewing pin and had gotten pregnant. It didn't take long before things got worse. He nearly choked her during a fight, and the relationship ended shortly after. Story 14. It wasn't said to me but to my friend. We were at another friend's party when my friend got drugged and overdosed. Her boyfriend, me, and one other person tried our best to get her help, but the girl who hosted the party refused to let us actually call an ambulance. The boyfriend ended up calling his mother, who was a nurse, and they got her to the ER. After that, my friend became very nervous about going out and was scared because she didn't know who had drugged her. Many months later, the girl who hosted the party admitted she actually knew who had done it, but didn't want to get anyone in trouble. By the time my friend learned who it was too late for any legal consequences. The girl who threw the party had seen how sick my friend was and how she had lost consciousness, yet still chose to protect the person responsible who had done it for fun. It deeply affected my friend. She had to live with that trauma while watching the girl who drugged her continue to party and even do the same thing to others, with full knowledge and silence from the one who had hosted the party. Story 15. So I'm friends with a family. My original connection was with the dad. We met through a shared activity. Then with the daughter, she came back from college and also joined that activity. About 2 years later, and shortly after that, I got to know the mom, the son, and eventually the extended family because it was Thanksgiving. The mom and I were in the kitchen having drinks and just getting to know each other. It was a bit strange because we had each heard about the other through stories over the years but had never met. That's when the mom's mother, Grandma, walks in, looks at us and says, "Did she tell you my brother hurt her? Because it's a lie." I'm not sure I've ever seen someone shut down so fast. The mom went from laughing and enjoying herself to slouching over, trying not to cry. Honestly, I still believe Grandma said that not just to be cruel, but also because she thought I'd somehow turn against her daughter. I just got up, told her that I thought it was time for her to go, and said it was lovely meeting her, then walked her out the door. I was raised with good hosting manners after all. I don't think Grandma even realized what was happening until she was already outside. The mom started crying. I told her I believed her and that I wasn't sorry for kicking her mother out because she was genuinely awful and needed to leave. I was drunk, sure, and while I can be polite when needed, I also have the mouth of a sailor and I was furious. Who does that? The shock didn't even sober me up. I vaguely remember telling the dad something like, "Your mother-in-law is a nightmare," and I kicked her out before crashing in a guest room. 15 years and many family dinners later, including 2 more times when I walked Grandma out for other terrible remarks, I got a call from the daughter. Her uncle had died. The mom had been estranged from him even before she had kids. She told me she made that choice to protect her children in a way her own mother hadn't. The daughter was upset because Grandma wanted her mom to go to the funeral, and she refused. The daughter was thinking of going, but her mom didn't want her to. It was one of those "oh no" moments. I spent half an hour verbally dancing around it, texting the dad at the same time to beg him to call me back. Mom never really got the hang of texting. He finally saw the messages and told me to calm the daughter down and have her call her mom. After their talk, the daughter called me again, frustrated that her mom had told me, but not her. Even when the daughter had disclosed her own unrelated traumatic experience to her mom, the mom immediately called the police and got her into therapy. The dad, meanwhile, took a more direct approach and told the man involved to stay away from his daughter, or else, possibly while holding a weapon. The dad had been trying for years to get the mom into therapy and to cut ties with grandma permanently. Eventually, I had to explain that it wasn't the mom who told me. Grandma did. She said it at Thanksgiving, the very first time I met her. That was the first time I kicked her out. There were two more. Each time was because she was being cruel to her daughter. The mom and I talked about everything later. She told me the moment she really saw me as part of the family was when I stood up for her and kicked her mother out. She was shocked that a relative stranger immediately protected her and believed her. I think, in a way, it helped her realize that she deserved better than what her mother had given her. And maybe that helped her start pulling away from that toxic relationship. It meant a lot to her. And honestly, I'd do it again without hesitation. Story 16. I was working with someone I'd collaborated with on and off for a few years. We were on a pretty decent project together, and one day during a casual conversation, he shared something that completely floored me. He told me about a trip he took to Cambodia and how, during his stay, he went looking for adult companionship. He asked a local for help, who said, "Yeah, I got you," and gave him a ride on his moped to a secluded shack. When they arrived, the man told him that someone was inside and to go ahead. My colleague said that when he entered the shack, he immediately realized the person inside was far too young and that something was seriously wrong. Despite this, he admitted to going through with it and described the moment in disturbing detail, as if it were some casual story to share over coffee. I was horrified, completely sickened, not only by what he had done, but also by how casually and proudly he spoke about it. I didn't respond in the moment, but I couldn't look at him the same way again. It made me realize how little we truly know about the people we work with, and how darkness can sometimes hide behind a professional smile. Story 17. One time, a coworker and friend randomly told me that when she was 16, she had been assaulted by her father and had to terminate a pregnancy as a result. We were both in our 40s at the time, professionals, and not talking about anything deep or personal. It was around 10 a.m., and we were sitting in a Denny's or something like that. I'm used to people opening up to me, but this was extremely unexpected. What made it even more difficult to process was that her father had also emotionally mistreated both her and her mom, and yet the mom stayed with him knowing everything. What's even more unsettling is that my friend is still very close to her mother and her adult sister. The sister was never harmed directly, but she knew everything that had happened, and no one else in the family seemed to carry the same anger or trauma as my friend. She clearly resented her dad, but the others didn't. After that, things felt odd between us, not because of what she told me, but because she shared something so huge out of nowhere, and yet still maintained close bonds with people who had failed to protect her. It was a lot to take in. Story 18. I had a friend who pretended to be half Palestinian Arab, but she later admitted she was actually half white and half white Jewish. She eventually confessed to exaggerating her identity, but even after that, she continued to present herself as Arab. She created an entire false persona for our friend group, all women of color and myself, claiming to have a heart condition so we'd feel sorry for her. She also told us she was being starved by her mother, who was supposedly giving all their money to a cult, when in reality she just wanted money for drugs. It later came out that her father is a wealthy business owner in a Long Island town where the average family income is around $500,000. She would lie to him, claiming she was having mental health episodes, so he would pay off her credit cards every time she maxed them out. Once she told me that she and her boyfriend got revenge on their landlord by doing something highly inappropriate on his couch, completely disrespecting the property. Later, she seriously violated my boundaries and tried to justify her behavior by saying her OCD therapist had advised her to detach from guilt as part of her treatment. When I confronted her, she claimed I made everything up to attack her mental illness and then threatened to report me. There's a lot more bizarre and disturbing behavior she's displayed, but honestly, it just goes to show, you really think you know your friends until you don't. Story 19. My best friend disappeared one day. We were supposed to meet up, but he never showed. After a few days with no response, I finally heard back from his mom, who gave me a number to text. He responded, told me he'd be back in a month, and that he'd explain everything then. I was genuinely scared. Thought maybe he was really sick or something serious had happened. He had just gone through a breakup and was hooking up with new people, so I assumed maybe he had contracted something or found out he had a serious illness. After a few weeks, I even began to worry it was cancer. When I finally saw him again, he looked pale, almost gray. He met me in the driveway and said he couldn't come inside. I assumed he didn't want to risk spreading or catching anything, maybe because of a compromised immune system. We got into his truck and drove toward a restaurant. After a heavy silence, he finally sighed and said, "I'm going to prison." My mind immediately jumped to something accidental. Maybe he had unintentionally caused someone harm. That would explain why he looked so distraught. I was still trying to figure out how to ask what had happened when he answered the question before I could form it. I was arrested for possession and distribution of illegal material involving minors. I froze. That was the last thing I ever expected to hear from him. The realization hit instantly. He didn't come into my house because I had a child, and he likely wasn't allowed around them. I've never felt so physically ill from hearing someone speak. That moment completely shattered everything I thought I knew about him. Story 20. A colleague at work, I work in a large general hospital, came out of the room of a very ill patient with an expression I had never seen before. I caught up to her and asked what was wrong with Big Betty and if there was anything I could do to help. That was my mistake, because yes, there was absolutely something I could do. The night staff had reported that Betty was crying out in pain all through the night, despite receiving every type of pain relief available. I brought everyone down to the break room and asked very seriously what the plan was for the night. That's when I learned the syringes they had contained a muscle relaxant, along with other powerful substances intended for end-of-life care. The idea was to provide her with a peaceful and painless departure. These nurses were clearly shaken, but I knew what needed to be done. I had a short conversation with their senior and then took Betty's favorite drink, along with the carefully prepared medication, in my pocket. For a few minutes, we had a lovely time together. She even managed to recall the rules of backgammon. Then about 7 or 8 minutes in, she became tired and wanted to go to bed. I helped her get comfortable, arranged some music for her, and placed a book beside her. Even though she could no longer read, she always brought a book to bed out of habit. Then gently, I administered the full dose through the IV line already in her arm. There was no chance of survival. She would pass within minutes. I called the rest of our team in, and we all sat with her, held her hands, and comforted her. If nothing else, she left this world knowing she was cared for and not alone. Story 21. There was this couple my wife had been close with in college. After we started dating, she reconnected with them, and we all started spending time together. My first impression of the guy in the couple was that he was friendly and seemed relatively normal. But the more time we spent with them, the more strange things I started to notice. Too many to list here, but over time, I just didn't feel comfortable being around them. About a year later, after a dinner with both couples, the guy pulled me aside and told me something that happened at work. He was a trauma nurse at one of our local hospitals. That day, an infant had passed away, not his patient and not on his floor. He told me that somehow he had taken the infant's body before it was brought to the morgue and brought it into a bathroom, where he baptized the baby in the sink so it could get into heaven. I was speechless. I asked him if the baby's parents shared his religious beliefs, and he said he had no idea. They didn't even know he did it. But I couldn't just let the baby be lost, he said. That was one of the most shocking things I had ever heard. I distanced myself from both of them after that. In hindsight, I wish I had contacted the hospital. It's something I still regret. Not doing more to make sure he never repeated something like that, or worse. Story 22. My mom and I were in therapy together, and we often ended up fighting. The therapist almost always seemed to take her side. Because she was a teen mom, my grandma raised me for the most part, and my mom resents her for that. She believes my grandma stole me away. At one point, she brought up an incident where I had an accident out of state, and my grandma refused to watch my brother so my mom could come get me. Instead, my grandma went herself. I told her, Grandma was right. She doesn't owe you childcare. And my mom took that as a personal attack. She told the therapist how disrespected she felt, especially since she wanted to place me for adoption. But my mom, Grandma, threatened to kick me out if I did. I had never heard that before. I ran to the restroom to cry. All my life, she tried to control me and dictate who I should be, yet she hadn't even wanted to keep me in the first place. When I came back, the therapist scolded me for crying in the lobby restroom because it might have made other clients uncomfortable. That was one of the final straws. I stopped bringing my mom to therapy after 1 or 2 more sessions and eventually stopped going altogether. It was too much. Story 23. My mother and I were hanging out late one night watching TV. I was a freshman in high school at the time, and this was one of our first weekends together since my father had taken over custody a year prior. She seemed a little out of it when she suddenly whistled to get my attention. I looked away from whatever we were watching, and she said, "I want to tell you something, but it's a big something. You can never tell your sister or your dad, or anyone." I remember the absolute terror that washed over me as I simply nodded for her to go on. She confessed that while she and my father were still together, she had been seeing someone else, someone my sister greatly resembled. So, at nearly 1 a.m., in a pitch-black room lit only by the television, my mother revealed to me not just an affair, but the possibility that my only biological sibling of 9 years may not actually be my full sibling. And I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. Eventually, I did tell my sister, though the decision weighed heavily on me for a long time. I often wonder if I did the right thing by telling her. My mother and I no longer speak due to other issues between us, but I still wish her well. No one should have to hear that kind of truth from a sibling instead of a parent. Story 24. I had a friend's older brother confess to hurting one of my friends. It was the first day of my last year in college, and I was getting ready to go to a festival with my best friends Luna and Mike. At the time, Luna was dating a guy named Zach. About 10 minutes before Luna showed up to my house, I got a call from Zach's older brother. He was really upset, talking about ending his life and how he was being bullied for allegedly doing something horrible. I asked him who it involved and whether it was true. He immediately admitted that it was and started describing different situations. To add some context, he had been diagnosed with Asperger's, so I wasn't sure at first how to interpret the information. Ultimately, I brought it up during a therapy session, and it was taken seriously. It turned out to be true, but no one felt safe or ready to come forward publicly. Zach's family tried to sue me for defamation, but they couldn't, because I hadn't lied. Story 25. My mom once told me that her sister, my aunt, had been single and childless for a long time, and eventually decided she wanted to adopt. She came in contact with an older woman who was caring for the 6 children of her daughter, who was in prison for something related to drugs. The grandmother told my aunt that she could adopt the youngest child for 22,000 pesos. My aunt paid the money, and the child has been with her ever since, as far as I know, without any legal adoption papers, since she was 1 year old. To this day, I don't think the biological mother ever found out that her youngest child was given away by her own mother. My aunt genuinely loves the child, but I can't help but wonder how much emotional confusion and trauma the little girl might face. I'm almost certain she will try to find her birth mother one day, and that her mother might also try to find her. I can't imagine what the older siblings must have felt about their baby sibling being adopted this way. It always sounded shady to me, especially since the adoption agency that supposedly helped with all of this disappeared shortly after the payment was made. Story 26. When I was 18, I dated a guy who told me he had served time in jail. He also said that he had been involved with a drug organization that ordered him to take someone out to the desert and end their life. He left the body there. I have no idea if it's true. He didn't give any names, no locations, nothing. I've often wondered whether I should report it, but there's literally nothing concrete to go on. It always felt like a dead end. I later found out that he didn't serve a full sentence. Apparently, he was in jail only on the weekends, which was bizarre in itself. Another guy I dated once told me he had taken someone's life while working in law enforcement in India. This one seemed more believable. He said he and some other officers were trying to punish a man for something, but things went too far and the man didn't survive. According to him, everyone involved was a cop. Hearing these stories from people who, on the surface, seem completely normal, makes me wonder, are there more people walking around with these kinds of pasts than I ever realized? Or did I just have the absolute worst luck in dating? Either way, it's deeply unsettling. Story 27. My parents recently finalized their divorce after about 15 years of a rocky marriage, and my mom told me some really disturbing things about my dad, mainly because he's been spreading rumors that she cheated. That sadly didn't surprise me, but given the following details, it's more than a little ironic. He's cheated before, which I already knew, but he's also a textbook narcissist who loves to blame others. Classic behavior for someone like that. Apparently, when we moved, when I was just 8 years old, we had hired a housekeeper, and he used to make comments about her appearance. At one point, he even asked my mom if they should invite her to join them intimately. That shocked me because 1, gross, and 2, we're conservative Indian people, and I was surprised he even brought something like that up. And my mom warned me before telling me this one. On the day of her 40th birthday, my dad asked her if he should hire a male escort to entertain her. She obviously said no. I asked if he was joking, and sadly he wasn't. Maybe that's normal for some people, not judging, but it was wild hearing all this from my actual parent. Story 28. Whenever I have someone new join my department at work, I always try to talk and share stories with them to help them feel welcome and get a sense of who they are. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Ray. Ray was only a couple years younger than me, both of us in our early 20s, and he seemed genuinely eager to connect with others. While I was teaching him how to stock product in the back of our section, we started talking about life, and he told me a story that stayed with me. He shared that he had a child who passed away. The child was only about 1 year old at the time. Ray said he had briefly dated a girl who suddenly ghosted him. Out of the blue, she called him, and before she could even speak, he asked, "Are you pregnant?" She said yes, and they kept in touch until one day she vanished again. Sometime around New Year's, Ray got a call from the girl's father, who told him, "I'd want someone to tell me, so I'm telling you. You're a father now." Ray tried to get custody, and while I don't know the full details, he didn't win the case. I didn't ask many questions. I was honestly stunned. He explained that the mother was anti-vaccine, and their son got sick. Tragically, his body couldn't fight off the illness, and he passed. I'd only known Ray for a few hours, and he was barely 21, but I genuinely felt for him. That wasn't his only hardship. He had clearly gone through a lot physically and emotionally. I haven't seen him in a long time since he left the company, but I really hope life gets better for him. Story 29. In my town growing up, there was a man who was about 13 years older than me when I was in high school. He had a bad reputation as a drug dealer. He sold and gave out Xanax, cocaine, and other substances, often targeting people to get them hooked so they'd become steady customers or, disturbingly, to gain influence over women. For some reason, he decided to do most of his business at my school, even though he was from 2 towns over. This guy has seriously hurt people. He looks and acts exactly how you'd expect someone to act who's completely lost. Honestly, it wouldn't shock me if others thought the world would be a better place without him. I've thought that myself. But back then, for whatever reason, I hung out with him occasionally. Once I asked him why he was the way he was, and why he didn't try to change. He told me, "Once you start digging that hole, after a while it becomes too deep to get out." My first reaction was anger. How could he admit to giving up, knowing the harm he was doing? He seemed to know exactly how bad of a person he was and still showed some desire to be better. But somewhere along the way, he convinced himself it wasn't possible. So he kept living in that darkness and kept ruining lives, especially of young people. Maybe if someone had helped him earlier, or if he had helped himself, things could have been different. But they weren't. And I try not to think about it anymore. But if I ever find myself diagnosed with something terminal, let's just say I'd make a list, and I'd be sure his name is on it. Story 30. Okay, so this girl I met was from a Muslim-majority country, and she went to Germany for her higher studies. During her time there, she had relationships with quite a few men, around 50 or 60, according to her. One of the men, who apparently had some pretty questionable views, asked her to wear a hijab during an intimate moment. As disturbing as that was, it wasn't even the most shocking part of what she shared. Back in her home country, she was already engaged to her cousin. In their culture, it's considered very important for a woman to be a virgin on her wedding night. And after the first night of marriage, it's customary to display blood-stained sheets outside the house to prove purity to the community. This girl was extremely anxious about it, and so she reportedly had a surgical procedure done and inserted something known as a blood capsule into her body to simulate bleeding. I'm still not entirely sure what that is or how it works, but that's what she told me. It was deeply uncomfortable just to hear about, and honestly, I still don't know how much of it was true. But I couldn't figure out why she would lie about something so specific and unsettling. Story 31. When my grandmother passed away in 2007, my mom told me that she had a baby as a teenager and had been sent to live with the nuns. The baby was dark adopted, which I've come to understand means a closed adoption with no contact. Despite that, my mom had spent years trying to find her first daughter, mainly because she wanted to warn her about a serious hereditary heart condition. Apparently, with the internet, you can do all kinds of things today that weren't possible back then. Fast forward to 2018, and my mom is in the hospital on her deathbed. The phone rings and I hear her talking to someone. She says, "Oh no, sweetie, I'm not going to die," and ends the call with, "Okay, I love you too." I was confused. Every female relative was already at the hospital with us. I asked her, "Who was that?" My aunt turned pale and muttered, "Oh God, you don't know." And in that moment I knew. I sat up and said, "Holy crap, was that my sister?" My aunt looked relieved and replied, "So you do know." Okay then. I was freaking out. I knew about her, but I didn't know Mom had actually found her. Oh my God, how long have they been in contact? My aunt looked away, cleared her throat, and said, "Almost 5 years. Story 32. A friend I used to have, we're no longer in contact, once shared a story that her current fling had told her, apparently to impress her. Personally, I believe the whole thing was made up, which honestly makes it even more disturbing. So this guy supposedly worked for a company that cleaned up after crime scenes, handling remains, sanitizing, and so on. According to him, he and a coworker were alone at a scene where someone had passed away in a bathtub. He claimed they were left alone with the body to do the cleanup. Then he said something that completely floored me. He had heard that the femur was the strongest bone in the body and tried to test that theory on the deceased person, attempting to break the bone multiple times and failing. Needless to say, my jaw was on the floor. What was even more baffling was that my friend didn't think there was anything wrong with this story. She actually got annoyed with me when I called it out as a massive red flag. I still don't understand how someone could make up such a disturbing tale, think it's funny, and share it casually. And even more confusing is how someone else could listen and not see the problem. Story 33. My best friend, female, and I, female, were in 10th grade at the time. She had started dating a senior, and his best friend was a 22-year-old guy who was pretty well known around our small town. We were all hanging out after school one night, and the guys had already rolled the blunts before we arrived. My mom had always warned me never to smoke anything I didn't personally see being prepared, so I didn't smoke that night. While we were sitting around, the 22-year-old started casually talking about how he would add substances to blunts when sharing them with women so that they would be more relaxed and easier to control. He claimed they would still be awake and responsive, but unable to resist or speak up. Hearing that was absolutely terrifying. I immediately told my friend we needed to leave, and I made her promise we would never smoke with them again. Over the next few days, he kept messaging us, insisting we should hang out and that he could make us feel good and safe. This was also the same guy who bragged about hurting the mother of his child when she didn't listen to him, and admitted to frequently cheating on her, with both willing and unwilling partners. Sadly, a lot of girls in town had similar stories about him, but no one ever pressed charges. His father held an important position in the area, and people were scared or discouraged from taking action. Story 34. 2 girls in my class had a crush on the same guy. I was mature enough to ignore my feelings because I thought crushes were silly at the time, LOL. This guy had a sister. I was friends with one of the girls, but not as close to the other. The girl I wasn't close to claimed she had spoken with the guy's sister and said that the sister told him about my friend's feelings. Naturally, this really hurt my friend, thinking her secret had been exposed. So we went and talked to the sister directly. She said she never said anything like that and that the guy didn't know anything about it. We started to suspect the other girl was lying, especially since she had a history of questionable behavior. When my friend confronted her, she locked herself in a bathroom stall and started fake crying. And I mean clearly fake. She used to brag about how good she was at pretending to cry, and when she came out, she was acting completely normal again. We tried speaking to her a few more times about her behavior, and how we wouldn't continue hanging out with her if she kept doing things like that. She also had a habit of trying to take things from another girl in our group, even though she wasn't struggling financially. It didn't seem like she needed anything, just that she wanted more. But here's the strange part. She never really responded to our concerns. She would just smile and nod, as if she wasn't taking in anything we were saying. It was frustrating and a little sad to witness. Story 35. I was once online friends with a guy from India whose family had moved to Italy when he was a teenager. He had an older sister and lived with both parents. At first, he came across as a nice guy, funny, smart, and polite. But after some time, his questions started becoming strange. He would ask me about controversial or taboo topics, and eventually the subject of family relationships came up. I told him that I didn't want to discuss that. It was a deeply sensitive subject for me due to personal trauma. But he continued, saying he didn't understand why people made such a big deal out of it. Then he told me he had been involved in a relationship with his older sister and had thoughts about being involved with his mother. At first, I thought he was joking or trying to get a reaction. But about a week later, he claimed that he had acted on those thoughts with both women. He said their family had become very isolated after moving abroad and that the household dynamics had become unhealthy, especially with their father working overseas most of the time. The moment he made that final confession, I immediately blocked him. It was disturbing and not something I ever expected from someone who had initially seemed so normal. Story 36. A client, a woman in her 50s, once told me a story that left me deeply disturbed. She said her son, who was 8 years old, didn't know that he and his younger brother, 3 years old, were actually adopted. In reality, the 8-year-old was not her biological son, but her grandson. She had been raising him ever since her niece, his biological mother, gave birth. As it turns out, her own son had fathered a child with his first cousin, and she ended up raising the baby. The man, now in his 20s, still lives on her property, doesn't have a job, and relies entirely on her for food and shelter. He doesn't contribute and apparently encourages the older child, his own son, who thinks he's his brother, to act aggressively toward the grandmother who's raising them both. Even more complicated, the grandmother and her former husband have been divorced for 7 years, but they haven't told the kids yet. Every time she tries to set boundaries or tells her son that she can't continue to support him, he threatens emotional breakdowns in front of the kids. She ends up letting him stay. He spends all day in his room, watching TV while she continues to manage everything else. It was truly heartbreaking to hear her describe the situation. She was clearly overwhelmed and stuck in a toxic cycle. As a side note, she also shared stories about being a groupie decades ago and talked in great detail about 3 days she spent with a famous musician while on tour. It was one of the most bizarre and emotionally complex stories I've ever heard. Story 37. I had a former coworker I thought was a decent guy. We'd worked together for years, and when his lease was up, I even helped him move into the same apartment complex I lived in. We became neighbors and even carpooled to work from time to time. After a few months, I started receiving messages from random people, including screenshots of conversations. These messages appeared to show him trying to engage in highly inappropriate chats with underage girls. At first, I didn't believe it. Screenshots can be faked after all. But then someone tracked him down and asked me to confirm his identity since we lived in the same building. Just days before I was planning to confront him, he approached me himself. Completely out of nowhere, he asked me how he could hide online activity and avoid detection. He knew I worked in IT security, and he started asking questions that made it clear he was looking to conceal something serious. That's when I realized he was essentially confessing to being a predator. I was torn about what to do at first. I didn't have solid evidence, just suspicion and conversations. But then 2 concerned parents reached out to me, saying their children had received disturbing messages from someone who matched his description. They asked me to confirm it was him, and sadly I could. We gathered everything we could and passed it all on to the authorities. Not long after, he was arrested. Investigators found illegal content on his computer. From what I heard later, one of the parents even confronted him directly before the police got to him. He's now in jail. I had worked beside this man for over 3 years and lived next to him for 4 months, never once suspecting he was capable of something like this. Story 38. About 6 years ago, my husband's uncle and dad came to visit us. One afternoon, my husband went out with his dad and the kid's grandfather to buy some gifts, leaving me at home alone with the uncle and our two youngest children. The youngest was napping, and my 10-year-old daughter was in her room. While we were in the living room, the uncle started bragging about how he used to encourage his sons to physically fight each other as kids, thinking it would toughen them up. That was already disturbing, but then he began telling a story from a family gathering when he was 26, recalling how he once tickled a 12-year-old relative inappropriately and laughed it off as harmless because she giggled. He said she liked it and that it was all just playful. The way he spoke about it made it clear he didn't understand or didn't care that what he described was completely unacceptable. I was stunned and horrified but couldn't immediately ask him to leave since my husband had taken the car. I took the kids into my room, closed the door, and put on a movie to distract them until my husband and his dad returned. When they got back, I told him everything, and he handled it from there. Story 39. A woman I used to know, who was friends with a close friend of mine, once shared something that made me cut all contact with her. She told me she was HIV positive and that she had never disclosed this to any of her past partners. She claimed she and a group of other women who were also HIV positive referred to themselves as the killer kitties and deliberately had unprotected relations with men without informing them. They would laugh and talk about the different people they had been with, treating it like a game. One of the women from that group was tragically killed by someone who suspected he had been infected and reacted violently. After hearing all of this, I walked away and never looked back. In another situation, a man I had been dating told me something disturbing as well. He lived with his parents and his stepsister, who was 25 at the time, while he was only 16. He confessed to being involved with her and suspected he might be the father of her child. She refused to allow a paternity test and moved out soon after. She claimed she had a boyfriend, but no one had ever seen or met him. Despite his insistence on finding out the truth, she cut contact completely. Story 40. My father and his brother married identical twins, my stepmother and my aunt. While my father and stepmom divorced over 20 years ago, he still refers to them as the twins. My aunt and uncle had 3 children. Their first child struggled with substance use for 30 years, their second passed away as an infant, and their third was conceived after many years of difficult fertility treatments. One day, while visiting my father, I brought up the hardship my aunt and uncle had endured and said something like, "No one should have to go through all of that." My father's response shocked me. "Well, they're not very nice people." He went on to imply that they somehow deserved their suffering, with a judgmental tone and dismissive body language. I was speechless. Instead of expressing empathy for his own brother's tragedies, he blamed them. It was in that moment that I truly saw who he was. That conversation marked the end of our relationship. I've never told anyone in the family why I cut contact with him. My siblings likely think I'm being dramatic, but I would never wish the knowledge I have about his coldness on anyone else. Story 41. Back in college, I was spending time with a close friend. We were a bit drunk and high, sharing stories from our childhoods. Out of nowhere, he told me something that broke my heart. He said that when he was a child, his older brother would come into his room every night and force him into inappropriate situations, framing it as taking medicine before bed. This went on from the time he was 8 until he was 13. He said that when a friend at school showed him a video online, he finally understood what had been happening to him. It was the first time he realized it wasn't normal. He never told anyone because he was ashamed and worried people would label him negatively, especially since he said he had gotten good at it from years of being forced. I was overwhelmed and started to cry, but he got upset, told me to forget it, and later texted that he had made it all up. But the look in his eyes when he told me was all the confirmation I needed. We drifted apart after that night, and I've always wondered what happened to him. What he went through was horrifying and sadly far too common. Story 42. While studying abroad, I made a friend and we ended up going out together almost every night. We typically visited the same 2 bars. On our very first night, something really disturbing happened. One of the bar owners made inappropriate advances toward me and another friend. It was deeply unsettling, but somehow my best friend convinced me that it wasn't a big deal. Against my better judgment, I continued going back. The last night I ever set foot in that place, things escalated. The owner started groping me and forced himself on me, trying to kiss me and touching me without consent. When he kissed my neck, I caught my friend's eye and silently signaled that we should leave. She didn't move. I had to physically push him off me. I grabbed her hand and told her it was time to go, because it was getting really late. The owner had to unlock the gate to let us out. It was after closing, and we were the only ones inside. As I walked her home, she turned to me and asked if I had liked what happened. Then she said she was relieved the owner always went after me instead of her. I was speechless. That night was the last time I ever went near that bar, and the last time I considered her a friend. Story 43. I used to know a guy who perfectly fit the mold of what we now call a nice guy, before that term was even common. His pattern was always the same. Find women going through rough breakups or who had complicated family lives, act like a savior, and then get upset when they didn't return his romantic interest. He'd play the victim and couldn't handle rejection without turning bitter. One time he told me about his long-term girlfriend who broke up with him. Sometime later, she started dating someone new, someone who was just loosely connected to their friend group. One night, this nice guy and some of his friends ran into her new boyfriend at a bar. Instead of ignoring him or acting like grown adults, they violently attacked him, beating him so badly that he ended up in the hospital with multiple broken bones. He told me this story like it was completely justified, like it was the normal, expected thing to do. There was no recognition that she had moved on or that her new relationship was none of his business. I was already starting to see through his facade by then, but hearing him brag about that incident made everything crystal clear. That conversation marked the end of any respect I had left for him. Story 44. When my grandmother found out that my ex-husband had been physically abusive, serious assaults that left me bruised and beaten, her reaction shocked me more than I can even describe. Instead of showing support or concern, she told me with a straight face that I must have done something to deserve it. According to her, I had made him hit me. I was stunned. That moment changed the way I saw her forever. Our relationship was never the same after that, and it got worse. A few months later, she said someone she knew from a bar had seen me out with a close friend of mine. That friend happened to be black and gay, someone I trust completely. When she saw us together, she came to me and said that if I ever had a baby with a black man, the entire family would disown me. She even said that my 2-year-old son would grow up confused if his sibling didn't look like him. I was appalled and heartbroken. After that, I packed up and left my grandparents' house. I still speak to them occasionally, but I keep it distant. That kind of hatred and judgment was more than I could handle, especially from someone I once looked up to. Story 45. My dad once told me he found inappropriate images involving minors on my brother's phone. After I had already confided in him that I didn't feel comfortable being around that brother because he gave me the creeps. He said he just closed the phone and pretended not to see it, claiming it had happened months earlier. I live across the country, so at the time I felt helpless. A few weeks later, I asked again if he was going to do anything about it. That's when he told me that my brother's girlfriend had also found similar content, and that now my brother was being counseled by a pastor at their church. That was the final straw for me. I booked a solo flight across the country, walked straight into my brother's local police department, and told them everything I knew. Now I'm the black sheep of the family, the one everyone resents, but I sleep just fine at night knowing I did the right thing. Even now, my parents still try to convince me to have a relationship with my brother. It's a painful reminder of how deeply rooted generational trauma can be, but I won't be part of their denial. Story 46. My stepmother has a family member, let's call him Tom, who everyone refers to as the nice one. He's seen as a gentle, lovable guy, kind of like a real-life Santa Claus. He's been battling a slow-developing illness, something that might eventually take his life, so everyone just wants him to enjoy his time. He's universally adored. Tom has a daughter who met her husband when she was still quite young. She was a red-haired, quiet young woman living in an apartment complex. Her future husband was the maintenance worker there, a Mexican immigrant who was undocumented at the time. One night, after a few drinks, my dad started telling me about a disturbing conversation he once had with Tom. Apparently, Tom had confided in him about how upset he was that his daughter was engaged to that guy. I'm sure he used less polite language. Then, leaning in close, Tom asked my dad if he knew anyone who could take care of things like that. My dad was dead serious when he told me that Tom had essentially asked if he knew someone who could make his daughter's fiancé disappear. I still think about that conversation. You really never know what people are capable of. It still freaks me out to this day.